Without a delay, I'd like to turn today's program over to Sherry Mangum. Sherry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Sherry Mangum, and I'm the Director of Marketing for Freeboarders, and I would like to welcome you to today's conference. We're pleased to have two great outsourcing industry experts with us today to share some thoughts with you about outsourcing from China. First, let me introduce Mike Keating. Mike is a senior executive at Freeboarders and has over 20 years experience in the IT outsourcing space, and he also founded the Freeboarders Value Engineering Institute. And we're very pleased today also to have Cyril Elsinger with us. Cyril is a multicultural entrepreneur. He was educated in Switzerland and in the United States. And Cyril has 15 years of experience working in the China market. He currently acts as a strategic advisor to both commercial and government sectors on the China market. And before he was involved with this, he was also leading SoftTech China, formerly IT United, for over 10 years. And prior to that, he spent 8 years with EDS on various assignments in Europe, the U.S., and Asia Pacific. And then he came to China as head of technical infrastructure for General Motors. And when Cyril's away from the office, he has also authored a book by the name of Source Code China, the new global hub of IT outsourcing, which was published in 2007. And this was actually the first book that was written to address China's growing technology boom for software development and high-tech services. So without further ado, Mike, I'm going to turn this over to you, and then after the interview, I'll come back and we'll take some questions.
All right, very good. Thank you, Sherry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. There are a number of companies from multiple industries on the line, and some folks from Hewlett-Packard, Bank of America, TransUnion, Thomson Reuters, Nextel, ING, and then some smaller companies, Next, Apps, Axiom, some large companies, Scottrade, and a variety of people within those companies as well, at the CXO level to VP of Global Services to Director of IT. So it's an interesting topic, China, and choosing China is a very relevant topic to a variety of industries at a variety of levels within those companies. Good evening, Cyril. It's after midnight. I should say good morning, Cyril. It's after midnight in Beijing. Cyril is joining us from Beijing and spoke today at an IT conference in Jiangsu near Shanghai. Before we get into the interview, I'd like to add a little bit of personal background on Cyril. He was presented in March of 2008 with the Great Wall Friendship Award by the mayor of Beijing in recognition of his contribution to Beijing's economic development. He was also one of the few foreigners to run with the Olympic torch in the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And he's also very interesting. He's one of his passions is flying, and he was the first foreigner to be awarded a private pilot's license in China. He is also a relatively newly minted father, a 9-month-old baby girl, and is a serious world-class adventurer. So, Cyril, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike, and greetings everyone from Beijing. It's just the beginning of the second shift on this end.
Excellent, excellent. All right, Cyril, to start off the interview, I've got a question for you. A little bit about your book. You wrote Source Code China in 2007. Can you explain to the participants a little bit about the driving force behind the book and why at that point?
Absolutely. In fact, I have been involved at conferences overseas since the end of the 90s. And throughout the conferences, year after year, it became more and more obvious through all the questions that kept coming up that a lot of people had the misconceptions on one hand about China, the China market, but at the same time that simply there wasn't any information available. And after receiving the same type of questions year after year, it kind of became clear to me that I had to put into a publication a consolidation of all the questions on one hand and also share some information with the executive overseas decision makers in order to help everyone to understand better what the China market has to offer, and that's how the book was born. I'm pleased to report that the book will be published in Chinese at the beginning of Q3 by popular demand on this end. But actually, the intended audience initially of the book was overseas buyers and executive decision makers as a useful tool to make decisions and understanding why China is a compelling destination.
The last point you made is interesting. So that China is a compelling destination. Why do you think China, as a growing economy, is going to succeed and specifically succeed in IT?
Well, there's a number of reasons that are driving the IT sector in China. On one hand, the China market is just becoming the largest industry across sector. And obviously, in order to support these industries, the information technology and information systems are key support elements for all these companies and the relevant systems to operate. But at the same time, the government is providing key support to develop the technology sector and has identified the IT services sector as one of the key pillars of the economy. That was done actually some 12, 13 years ago. And now, a decade later, we're able to see the results in the economy on the output of talent, for example, on how a long-term planning by the government is showing its results.
So you've got experience in China that few Westerners have. You lived there for over 15 years. You've worked in the IT space in China for over 15 years. You have clients, you have people asking you why, how do they know that they should be moving business from one geography to China or going to China first? What are the things they should be looking for?
Sure. Well, on one hand, I think it's from time to time good to remember a slogan that was introduced by Gartner a few years back, which goes country before company. That's a helpful thought and guideline for decision makers asking themselves where they should outsource to from a market perspective. And what that slogan basically says is that any company that is looking at outsourcing first should determine for its company's core business which is the key market of expansion, where is the strategic market expansion for its core business. And once it's done that, then it makes most sense to leverage and outsource from the same market. So pretty much what that says is if a company wanted to be number one in Russia in the midterm, long term, it would make best sense for them to consider outsourcing from Russia as well and generate synergies and leverage from the core business investment and getting the return from the outsourcing value to improve on the synergy. And what's currently working in favor of the China market is that it's very true to say that every company across industry sector has some form of key strategic expansion into the China market, and that's greatly helping reshifting historical strategies that had various types of market destinations and reorient those efforts into the China market, and now increasing, growing, and vigorously engaging outsourcing into the China market.
So that's interesting. So I think what to summarize, one of the things you're saying is that it's instead of it just being an IT decision, it's actually a business and an IT decision. Companies that have entered into the China market from a business perspective, it's a natural extension to also deliver IT services from China back to the West.
Absolutely. In some ways, I like to use the comparison of the emergence of the internet and messaging systems some 15 years ago, more or less. And that kind of shocked the industry that was using at the time telex and fax machines. There was resistance by many, and then there was a wide engagement in it. Those that resisted eventually got convinced one way or the other, or simply got out of the market. So China is very well known for its manufacturing excellence over the last 3 decades. And some of the early companies that went to China from a manufacturing perspective also deliver their IT services from there. Do you think the history of China being a manufacturing excellence culture, do you think that plays into excellence in delivering IT services? I'm not sure if I would use the analogy of the manufacturing background of China as a means to explain why China is going to be successful in the IT services sector. But what I think we should all realize is that once China decides to do something at the central level and it gets rippled down at the provincial level and city levels, it's usually extremely well implemented, very rigorously implemented, and simply looking at the alignment of the academic sector, which was basically completely restructured to help focus the curriculum in an attempt to increase the number of graduates, has showed its results, and the number of annual graduates coming out of the universities in China in computer science and software fields is absolutely overwhelming.
Another example that you frequently talk about is the mobile phone, the dominance of the usage of mobile phones from only over 1 decade. Can you comment on why that's relevant?
Well, the image of the mobility and how that has moved swiftly over the past decade is a critical point to emphasize just how good the infrastructure has been developed in China. And the key here is that the market provides for a world-class infrastructure, of which the mobility is an example. You could pretty much say that there is currently some 800 million mobile users. And if you look at how mobile phone use is functioning here, it's actually extremely well covered. And whether you're in a big city, traveling to the land, the rural areas, even the mountains, you get full coverage pretty much everywhere you go. And that started to really surprise me when I had business trips back in the days on going to Europe and North America, it was somewhat frustrating to travel and try to conduct business with mobile phones in Europe and North America, as I, like other of my colleagues and peers in the industry, would share similar comments that we were constantly losing the connection, whereby in China, the minute you land, you turn on your phone and you've got high-quality connections throughout.
So we've talked a fair bit about large companies. Traditionally, large corporations from the West have outsourced over the last 10, even 15 plus years. A group of companies, kind of the modest-sized companies, called mid-market companies, are probably have been less open to it. Where do you think they fit into outsourcing, and particularly in China?
Sure. Well, historically, offshore outsourcing has been a strategy reserved to larger organizations, simply because in order to do this in a secure manner and bridge the distance, companies had the need to maintain dedicated broadband and pipelines, so to speak, between their foreign offices back to the vendor company's premises, wherever that would be. That was very costly. That was a limiting factor, and as a result, outsourcing strategies were kind of out of reach to a lot of mid-market companies and, you could say, small, medium enterprises in general. With the recent development of the Internet, with the recent availability of secure broadband dedicated channels riding on the Internet, the need to strictly work on dedicated pipelines that are purchased and rented from the local telecom on both ends is no longer required. As a result, it makes the availability of outsourcing strategy a wide open new set of options for companies that up to recently perhaps were either not considering it or thinking it was out of reach, too costly. Now, these companies are in a battle of their life, competing against everyday more global markets, and they have no options. They will need to improve their competitiveness over time, immediately, and fine-tune it over time in order to be able to compete against other competitors in their industry segments from other countries or other markets. So there's actually never been a better time for mid-market companies or small, medium enterprises to also vigorously engage into some form of outsourcing.
So I hear two key points there. One is that it's much more accessible than it ever has been to mid-market companies, primarily because of the ease of technology infrastructure. And the second is it's a must-do to be globally competitive, because their competitors are no longer in the region where they sit, but they are also global. Let's talk about some of the challenges. There are challenges in outsourcing from any geography. What are some of the common challenges you advise clients on considering China, and how do they mitigate some of those challenges?
Well, when you come to challenges, I think invariably the main concerns of the buyers or the decision makers run around what I like to outline as 5 key points. The first one being, do they speak English? Obviously, communication is a critical element and cannot be separated from a successful outsourcing engagement. So when it comes to China and the English topics, one has to understand that for the past 15 years, the government has been identifying English as the language of modernization to benefit the people of China, the country, and the economy. So as a result, 15 years later, you find ample English speakers across industry segments, across management layers, and the academic sector, which is graduating increasingly large numbers of technical talents, sees English-savvy speakers that are completely fluent also in the art of writing, and that provides a fantastic opportunity for companies that have the need for such resources. It's also interesting to note that in China today, there is more people learning English than the whole population of the United States, as the sake of comparison. The second point revolves around intellectual property rights. And since we're having a China-focused discussion tonight, let's not beat around the bush. Everybody talks about IPR. What about intellectual property rights? It's unfortunate that the perception on intellectual property rights that may be a problem in China are actually built on a misconception around consumer products that can be found on the street corner. Typically, we're talking about CD software that is for the retail market that can be found, maybe floppy DVDs of movies, and perhaps some fake watches, and other type of consumer products. That said, this has nothing to do with the ability to do business with a China-based outsourcing vendor once the validation has been done of the security in use at the premises, both physical and logical, and once the audit has been done on how the premise operates. So from an intellectual property rights, I am saying that there is absolutely not more risk today to outsource to China as there would be to outsource to another vendor based in another market or in another country, as long as the control mechanisms are in place. And as far as the intellectual property rights fight or battle is concerned, the Chinese government is in a very tight and focused mission to fight and reduce and hopefully eradicate the consumer product, fake product stigma that simply exists because of tourists coming over and finding such products available on the street. The third point would be information security. Of course, information security is a critical element of any outsourcing engagement. It goes a little bit back to the intellectual property rights discussion we just had. Information security will always be as good as the control mechanisms in place. And as long as the right partner, the appointed vendor, fulfills all of the physical premises, logical security, and physical security requirements that anyone would expect from an outsourcing vendor, regardless of the country where they're based, information security becomes a very small part of the risk which can be managed. The fourth point revolves around the quality of the talent. Most people overseas have not attended an academic institution in China or have not attended classes in a university. So it's only fair that they ask the question and want to understand better what they can expect from the talents that are eventually going to start working on their company's projects. And the answer there is that China is graduating today some of the world's most talented brains and engineers. Words are not always a good explanation for this. I think the best for this particular point is to encourage people to come over and see for themselves. The fifth point in the top 5 questions that concerns that people see as a challenge is what can they expect in terms of staff loyalty, or more commonly called the employee turnover. Some markets and some countries that have a historic experience and a more mature environment in the outsourcing industry, in the recent few years have experienced out-of-control turnover, and this is driving an acute frustration across industry sectors for companies that are engaged in outsourcing projects in such markets. Part of the answer is the availability of talents. Some markets have, in the recent years, not to be named, experienced a large increase of outsourcing volume going to their shore. At the same time, the volume of graduates in the computer science and software fields available to serve this increase of demand has simply not moved much. As a result, the turnover skyrocketing and creating a true problem. The situation in China is actually quite different. The volume of graduates has been increasing year over year very, very steeply over the past 5 years and continues to grow. The demand also is growing, but we are nowhere near the type of bottleneck that other countries may be experiencing. So the turnover is actually extremely stable, manageable, and what a company would expect when engaging an outsourcing project with a China-based partner. So these top 5 points, I would say, usually sum up the key concerns or challenges that people would expect or want to understand better when or before engaging a project or a partner in China.
In my experience, Cyril, is that those are pretty much the same 5 that you would have in just about any geography. It's how you manage them is what makes the difference.
That's right.
You spoke earlier on the culture of the Chinese government. You made an interesting comment that when the Chinese government gets behind something, it gets done. Remarkably efficiently. We all saw the Beijing opening night of the Olympics, and we're just astounded by what they could do in such a small period of time. They're building cities, and these cities of 10 million people, size of New York City, and they're building them in less than a decade. Speaking of the government, what type of programs have been put in place to help ensure the success of IT outsourcing from China back to the West?
The number of programs that are available actually exist at different levels. there is a number of national level programs that are available to companies that do business or conduct operations in the outsourcing IT services sector. There are simply too many to be discussed, but I think perhaps that would be a good idea for a focused follow-up discussion at the later stage if you or your scholars are interested. But typically the subsidies, the programs to encourage and develop this industry can be divided in national level programs and then provincial level programs and then further down to the city level programs. And I think it's fair to say that today anyone interested in outsourcing to China will find the world's best offers on the market. In China, some of the programs offered are not just compelling, they're absolutely irresistible, provide instant competitive advantage to those lucky corporate decision makers that will have the visionary move to step in and engage partnership with a China vendor or come and establish for themselves a captive center.
You also talked about education and that China is developing more computer science and engineering graduates than both the United States and India combined. How do Western companies get access to the specific talent they need?
All right. Accessing the right talents is what it's all about, of course. If a company does not have a great deal of experience dealing in China yet, or China experience doing business in China, the obvious answer is to do business and start a partnership with a China-based partner once that partner has been validated and can be trusted following that company's selection criteria. The companies based in China understand the market inside and out. They are familiar with the government programs that are offered to help them develop and promote the talent and their services to overseas partners or clients. And I think there is no need to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, if a company wanted to do this by themselves, then there is any number of ways in which they go about doing it. It's though interesting to note that a lot of companies coming to China have executives think of themselves that they're China experts 1 week after they've been in China and start doing basic mistakes that foreign professionals have been doing for the past 2 decades. Strategies that work in another market do not necessarily work in the China market unless they're heavily adapted, customized, and implemented for China market success.
So it's an important point. I think what you're saying is cultural understanding, knowledge of how to get things done in China, cultural understanding, business understanding, political understanding are all key to being successful in China. There's also this very interesting study that came out from Heidrick & Struggles recently about nurturing talent. And the chart that's up on the screen right now ranks globally that United States has the most success in nurturing employees to improve their talent levels. Interestingly, they had China up there as number 6. And they had, it appears that India is actually falling off the chart. What are your thoughts on that?
Education in China is the highest level of personal achievement that any one individual can achieve for themselves and that can achieve for their family. This is ingrained in the society. People never cease to want to learn, educate themselves, and seek as much training opportunities as they can. And that is not just valid for people that are undergoing university or other forms of academic training, but it's very true for people that are in companies. And typically, employees in China will be longer employed in companies that provide more training over a certain period of time and that continue to add training to their career, if you wish. So, in other words, it would be fair to say that if a company offered a fixed amount of training, its Chinese employees would feel that they have exhausted the contingent of training available to them once they've gone through the whole training process available by particular companies, for example's sake, and then they would feel that they need to move on in order to progress and further themselves. So I think it's important to understand that, and most companies that are successful in the China market have put their arms around that important aspect to keep their employees, their key team members, challenged and able to further themselves on their careers throughout the time that they work in their companies.
So this topic of nurturing talent to me is critical in any company in any geography. The one program that we've seen a great deal of success with that the Chinese government sponsors is a program we call Easy as 1, 2, 3. And the idea behind it is that the Chinese government helps get preferential access to the top university graduates. They will sponsor NIIT coming in and doing custom training of these graduates after they leave the university. And then roughly for about the first 90 days, they sponsor those new graduates on behalf of a Western client. And the purpose of this is to encourage Western companies, U.S. companies, North American companies, to move some of their outsourcing to China. So they are, back to your point of dozens and dozens of interesting creative programs, this 1, 2, 3 program is one. You also talked a little bit about cultural fit. Can you talk about why China is an interesting cultural fit with Western companies?
Sure. I think it would be very obvious to a lot of people that have had a chance to travel already to China and see it. The society is actually extremely eager to learn from the Western society. And if you look at the younger part of the professional contingent in the industry, they are looking at TV programs in English. They're improving their skills in communications. They're making trips overseas to get a chance to visit cities and get exposed to societies there. They pretty much absorb the Western culture, and it's reflected in many ways on how you can see shops flourish, how brands are penetrating the market, how people going overseas kind of learn for themselves the icons of Western images. It's very much valid also for the middle class that is traveling more and more, and of which university graduates eventually access or have access to. So it's a society that is keen on communicating, on expanding and reaching out beyond the boundaries of the Great Wall. And I think we will see in the next 2 decades more and more clearly how this fusion of East meets West works, especially in the case of China.
Yeah, I saw a study some time ago done, I believe it was by NEO-IT, where they calculated that without the right cultural fit and communication fit between a outsourcing vendor and a client, you can have as much as 27% value leakage. So a cultural fit, while it's a soft thing, is absolutely critical to making business effective between two partners. Any examples of a Western company that you feel have made a very significant commitment to China?
Is that the moment where I'm supposed to talk about Free Borders?
No,
Just
no,
kidding.
a client. That's funny. That's very funny. Any client companies that have changed their kind of their sourcing strategy around the emergence of China over the last 10 years?
Well, in the outsourcing global framework, I think it's fair to give recognition in general to General Electric, GE, for being one of the thought leader in the outsourcing and outsourcing-related strategies. And I think it's no secret. It's actually public information. GE has announced a year and a half ago, I believe, its new strategy where it was decreasing the percentage of outsourced work going to India and then shifting and increasing the volume into the China market besides a few other destinations as well. So I would say maybe GE is the best example for people interested to look at a company that's having access to intelligence and being able to envision the future and planning long term with the China market.
Okay. What I'd like to do is do a very quick recap. I want to make sure that we've got enough time for questions. You talked about three key ideas and many additional ones that you had put in there as well. One is talent, the access to talent, the large supply, and the exceptionally high respect for education, the cultural fit. My experience is it's a fun country to do business with. These people, the teams that we work with there and work with clients back in the U.S., it is a very type A, very high work ethic and a high play ethic. They are sponges with the American, particularly the American culture. And then proven success. One of our earliest clients, 2001, was with DuPont, a Fortune 50 global manufacturer, at the time over $50 billion in sales. And that relationship in 2001 matured and won a Forbes and Everest Group Global Outsourcing Excellence Award in 2006. So, Sherry, I'd like to turn it back to you and open it up for questions.
Okay. While you guys have been talking, we have had an opportunity to get one question in via the web. And so, Mike, I'm going to address this one to you, and then maybe, Cyril, you can follow up. This question is from Rajiv. He wants to know his company is thinking about going to China, but not necessarily because their company is expanding into China. So why would he go to China first rather than India, who's been doing it for many more years?
That's a great question. We actually get that question with new clients. In my personal view, and I've been delivering from China for just under 10 years. I've been with the company for a little over 10 years. Is that China today is kind of where India was maybe 10 years ago. That the availability of talent, the management attention that Western clients got, the quality of talent, really just the overall enthusiasm for new clients is an extreme case right now for China. It's a much more aggressive business development client to do business with Western companies. A great example is that China's government investment. You heard Cyril talk about there are dozens of programs, and he who works with the right China partner and takes advantage of those programs can establish immediate competitive advantage over other choices around the world. So my view is that China is a great choice for a company that is new to offshore, because you'll get the hand-holding, the government sponsorship. And frankly, one of the things I found in China is interesting. You fly in, they have massive airports. The taxis run frequently. The roads move. The hotels are plentiful. So it's just a great and easy country to do business with.
And if I can add to this, I'm going to be more blunt. It's go to China or die over time, pretty much. The answer lies in rates. At the outskirts of the world's worst economic downturn, everyone is going back at the drawing boards, reviewing and revising their historical outsourcing strategies. Why? Because for the longest time, people are just going I'm not going to say lobotomized, but I just did, in a lobotomized way to certain market destinations, simply because there was a sense that a lot of people are going there, so we should be going there as well. It's a clear fact that rates are lower in China, that cost savings is the end game of the outsourcing sector. That said, we're in the middle of a talent world war. The talents are available in China like in no other market. And even if there is a preference to go in some other markets today, perhaps that is not an option, because the lack of supply of those talents and the recent past few years increase in demand has completely changed the environment to where the turnover is out of control. The prices have increased, and if you look at something that happened in India 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, the rupee appreciated in the course of 1 week by 11-12%. And if you add to that the fact that India has a 5% software export tax, that means that a year and a half ago, any service provided out of India for the offshore market was about 15-16%, just looking at those two components, less competitive compared to the same scenarios in China. And I think it's fair to say that first-tier cities of China today are at least 5% more competitive, and usually a lot more depending on who you work with compared to other markets. If you go to Tier 2 city, you increase your competitive edge and value, and you also start seeing valid business scenarios for Tier 3 cities in China, which are the end game and the ultimate winning proposition. So rates rates. The other requirements will be fulfilled. The quality will be there. The control mechanisms will be put in place in China like if they would be in any other countries, and then the rest becomes a non-issue.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask our operator, Summer, to activate the verbal question and answer time. So if you'd like to ask a question, Summer, do you want to give permission or directions for that?
Yes, at this time, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that's star 1. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster.
While we are paused, there is one more web question here. What are the typical and the most frequently offered services that you see being outsourced to China? You want to take that one first, Cyril?
No problem. I would say that at this time, most of the work being outsourced to China is IT outsourcing in nature, such as application and maintenance engagements, programming, coding, testing. The BPO side of the equation is not there yet, and I think it will be some time until we see large volumes in the English-speaking BPO arena move to China. But as far as the ITO side of the equation is concerned, Go China is the way to go.
Okay, Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
I support what Cyril's saying. It's traditional application development, maintenance, test, business intelligence. They have, the mathematics curriculum in China is absolutely world class. So the business intelligence and analytics there are exceptional. The another thing is the infrastructure services is a very hot market right now. Operating system and database support, remote infrastructure services is growing very rapidly.
All right. Summer, have we had any questions submitted?
There are no questions at this time. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, press star 1.
All right. Well, we'll leave it open for questions just for another second while I thank each of you for attending, and also let you know that invite you to please visit the Freeboarders website. We have 3 more webinars coming up this summer, so we invite you to participate in those. We have some special guests